The chamber of the Galactic Council echoed with the guttural laughter of the Viesha Dominion's warlords. Their armored forms loomed over the assembly, their crimson battle crests flaring in amusement across the room. Representatives of over 50 civilizations watched in grim silence as High Warlord Karish dismissed the warnings with a wave of his clawed hand. "This is your great concern," Karish scoffed, his fanged maw twisting in a smirk. "A primitive world on the edge of the outer rim, a species that has never even set foot beyond its own star system." The Council's holographic display flickered, showing the data once more. Every species that had ever tested humanity, whether through conquest, subjugation, or mere provocation, had ceased to exist. Their fleets had vanished, their colonies had gone dark. And yet no one knew why. They did not simply vanish. Counselor Thyron of the Serati hissed, her serpentine eyes narrowing. They were erased. No wreckage, no distress signals, not even debris. They challenged humanity and they ceased to be. Karish barked a laugh. "Ghost stories, nothing more than the ramblings of prey creatures afraid of their own shadows." He turned to his generals, all of them clad in ceremonial war armor, their scarred faces betraying nothing but contempt. "This council has grown weak. You shiver at the unknown and weave myths to explain it, but we are the Viesha. We do not fear the dark." Counselor Daylin, a veteran of 3 interstellar conflicts, leaned forward. His expression was not one of anger but of quiet, measured certainty. "Then you are making a mistake that will doom your people." The chamber fell into silence. Karish's amusement faded into a scowl. "You dare." "I dare warn you," Daylin interrupted. "You are not the first to believe Earth is a prize waiting to be claimed." The Tval thought the same. They sent a war fleet and no one ever saw them again. The Krathic hierarchy deployed bioweapons against human colonies. A month later their homeworld was reduced to ash. The Zerith Dominion, an empire greater than your own, boasted that humanity would bow to them. Daylin's gaze darkened. "They no longer exist." Karish bared his teeth. "Fabrications. Humanity is weak. If they had such power they would have conquered the stars by now." "They don't conquer," Daylin said softly. "They eliminate threats." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Karish turned, striding toward the chamber doors. "Enough of this. My fleet moves for Sol within the cycle. I will return with Earth's leaders in chains." He glanced back one last time, his gaze filled with contempt. "And when I do, I expect your apologies." The council watched as the Viesha delegation left, their laughter still echoing through the chamber. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. Thyron exhaled slowly. "They will not return." Daylin clenched his jaw. "No, they will not." The council's communication officer hesitated before speaking. Do we warn the humans?" Daylin shook his head. "No, they already know." Aboard the Viesha flagship, Karish stood on the bridge watching as his fleet, hundreds of warships each capable of burning a world to glass, slipped into faster than light travel. "Set course for Sol," he ordered. "Prepare the shock troops. Earth will kneel." Behind him the ship's AI flickered for a moment, an anomaly too subtle for any Viesha to notice. Deep within the Dominion's network something ancient stirred. Humanity had already seen them coming. And it was waiting. The Viesha fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system, a wall of warships gleaming under the dim glow of the distant sun. Hundreds of destroyers, battleships and dreadnoughts moved in perfect formation, their weapons primed for planetary assault. The bridge of the Doomfang High Warlord Karish's personal flagship was alive with the hum of tactical displays and the low murmur of confident warriors. The invasion had begun. Karish stepped forward, his gaze locked on the blue-green orb in the distance. "Scan the system," he commanded. "I want full strategic data on their defenses." The warlord expected resistance, a handful of orbital platforms, perhaps a meager fleet of primitive warships. Instead the bridge fell eerily silent as data streamed onto their consoles. No planetary defense grid detected. No active space-based weaponry. Minimal fleet presence, only a handful of ships in orbit. A ripple of disbelief passed through the command officers. "They are undefended," one of them muttered. Karish's lips curled into a snarl. "Pathetic." He turned to his generals. "They've spent centuries cowering beneath the Council's protection. They lack the will to resist us." The fleet advanced, engines burning hot as they surged toward Earth. Ground invasion plans were already being finalized. Viesha shock troops would land in key population centers, eliminating resistance. Within hours cities would be secured, governments dismantled, and within days humanity would bow before their new overlords. It was almost disappointing how easy it would be. And then the first ship vanished. Not exploded, not damaged, simply gone. A Viesha frigate at the fleet's outer edge disappeared from sensors mid-flight as if erased from existence. No energy signatures, no debris, no distress signal. "What just happened?" Karish snapped, his voice cutting through the growing tension. "Unknown," his tactical officer replied, frantically scanning the data. "We lost the Ruthless. One moment it was there and then another ship vanished. Then another." Panic rippled through the fleet as one by one entire vessels ceased to exist. No weapons fire, no impact signatures, just void where warships had been moments ago. "Pull the fleet back," Karish roared. "Titan formations," and a transmission cut across every channel, drowning out the chaos. "You should have listened." The voice was human, calm, detached. It carried no anger, no arrogance, only an undeniable sense of inevitability. Karish's claws dug into the railing as the ship's AI flickered symbols he didn't recognize flashing across every screen. His navigations officer let out a strangled gasp, his eyes wide with horror. Our systems, our entire network. He turned to Karish, voice trembling there inside. For the first time in his life, Karish felt it. Not battle rage, not the thrill of combat. Something deeper, colder. Fear. Across the fleet, weapons systems shut down, engines sputtered, ships found themselves unable to move, trapped in place as if caught in the grip of an invisible hand. Then, like a slow exhale, the Doomfang's lights dimmed, leaving only the flickering glow of failing emergency systems. Karish activated his comms manually, switching to an isolated frequency. Ground teams, proceed with the invasion. If they could not win in space, they would take Earth by force. But there was no response. Karish's eyes narrowed. Repeat, ground teams, confirm deployment. Silence. A single line of text appeared on the bridge's central display. Your forces are already gone. Karish's breathing slowed, his hands clenched into fists. Impossible. Another transmission came through. This time it was a live feed. The warlord turned, and for the first time he saw it. The ground teams had landed. He recognized the dropships, the formations of his elite warriors. They had touched down in the heart of one of Earth's cities, and yet the battlefield was empty. No humans, no resistance. Just his warriors moving cautiously through a silent metropolis. Then one by one they began to disappear. The feed cut to static. Karish stood frozen. His officers, the most feared tacticians in the Dominion, were speechless. The silence was broken by a final message, this time spoken, not transmitted. A whisper that came from everywhere and nowhere. Welcome to Earth. The bridge of the Doomfang was deathly silent. High Warlord Karish stood motionless, eyes fixed on the blank transmission screen. His elite invasion force, trained for planetary domination, forged in the crucible of 1,000 campaigns, had landed on Earth, and then they had disappeared, not captured, not killed in battle, simply gone. Karish forced down, the cold dread creeping into his bones. Re-establish ground communication. He barked his comms. Officers' claws trembled over the console. We can't. It's as if they never existed. The fleet had lost thousands of warriors in a single breath. No distress calls, no battle reports, only the silence of the void and that final chilling whisper, welcome to Earth. Karish turned to his tactical officer. Deploy the second wave. The officer hesitated. High Warlord, do it. More dropships launched, breaking through Earth's atmosphere like fire raining from the heavens. They descended upon the abandoned city where the first wave had vanished, scanners sweeping for any trace of their lost warriors, and then the screams began. It started as scattered bursts of gunfire, reports of movement in the shadows, and broken transmissions filled with static-laced panic. Then one by one every signal went dark. Karish clenched his jaw. What is this? A new transmission appeared on their displays, a grainy flickering feed from one of the soldiers' helmet cams. The warlord leaned in, watching the footage with narrowed eyes. The HFY soldier was breathing heavily, his pulse thudding in the audio. He was inside a dimly lit structure, weapon raised, moving cautiously. He turned a corner and the screen glitched for a fraction of a second. The image distorted, revealing something behind the soldier, a shadow, a figure too fast to see clearly. Then the screaming started. The soldier whirled around, firing wildly at nothing. His gunfire lit the room in bursts of muzzle flash, illuminating the walls, the floor, the ceiling, and the thing standing inches behind him. The feed cut out. Someone on the bridge cursed. Another warrior muttered a silent prayer to the war gods. Karish said nothing. He turned sharply toward his officers. Weapons lock on Earth. He ordered full bombardment. His second in command hesitated. Sir, the planet is inhabited. The council is not here. Karish's voice was ice. We wiped them out from orbit. The order was given. The Dominion's most powerful weapons, planetary razors, plasma torpedoes, fusion warheads primed to fire the Doomfang's main cannon, powerful enough to reduce continents to glass, charged with a deep resonant hum. And then the warship's lights went dark. The entire fleet followed. Systems flickered, weapons powered down, engines failed. The HFY warships, once symbols of unstoppable power, drifted lifelessly in the black void of space. The Doomfang's AI rebooted, screens flashing erratic symbols, unknown code flooding the system. An unfamiliar voice filled the bridge. No second chances. Karish stared at the displays, his mind racing. This wasn't just technological sabotage, this was something else, something impossible. His warriors were disappearing, his fleet was crippled. The enemy had never fired a single shot, and yet he was losing for the first time. Karish understood the warnings had been true. Humanity was not prey, it was not a mere civilization, it was something else entirely, and now the HFY were at its mercy. High Warlord Karish stood on the dimly lit bridge of the Doomfang, staring at the silent void beyond the viewport. His once mighty fleet, now reduced to drifting hulks, hung in orbit like lifeless corpses. The HFY had marched into the Sol system expecting conquest, expecting glory. Instead they had found something else, something that was watching them. Status report. Karish growled, his voice cutting through the uneasy quiet. His chief engineers' mandibles clicked anxiously. Weapons are offline. Navigation is unresponsive, our AI systems are compromised. He hesitated. Sir, it's as if the ship itself is no longer ours. Karish clenched his fists and the ground forces. The comms officer didn't answer at first. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. There are no ground forces, no survivors, no escape pods, no final transmissions, just nothing. A cold creeping horror settled into the warlord's gut. He had raised civilizations, crushed rebellions, annihilated entire species without remorse. He had never felt fear not like this. Activate emergency jump drives, he ordered. We are leaving. His officers hesitated. They had never retreated before, never abandoned a battle, but this was no battle, it was annihilation. They obeyed without question. The ship's emergency drives, running on independent systems, flickered to life. Power surged through the fleet as the engines prepared to rip them from Sol's gravity well, and then for the first time humanity acted. A transmission cut through all frequencies, not words, not threats, just coordinates. Karish's eyes narrowed. What is this, a trap, a warning? It didn't matter. He would not play their game. Engage the jump. The Doomfang surged forward, the emergency drives tearing open a wormhole. The shattered remnants of the Viesha fleet followed, escaping the nightmare of Earth's system. In an instant Karish exhaled, feeling the familiar pull of faster than light travel. They had made it. They had escaped, or so he thought, as the fleet emerged from the wormhole. Alarms blared. The navigation officer's voice was raw with disbelief. Sir, we're not at Vieshal. Karish's blood ran cold. Then where are we? The ship's main display flickered to life. A planetary scan appeared. Familiar landmasses, Viesha cities, the massive silhouette of the Dominion's capital fortress. They were at Vieshal, their homeworld, but something was wrong. The planetary defense grid was silent. No welcoming signals, no fleet patrols. The capital city's towering spires were dark. The communications array, one of the most powerful in the galaxy, broadcast only static. Karish stepped forward, his breath shallow. Magnify the image, sharpened. The city was empty. No ships in the sky, no movement on the streets, no trace of the billions of Viesha who should have been there. His homeworld was a tomb. No. Karish whispered, this is impossible. A single message appeared on the display, not a transmission, not a signal. It was already within their systems. We warned you. Something cold and unseen curled around Karish's mind, an understanding that defied logic. Humanity had let them run, but they had never escaped. They had never left Earth's grasp, and now neither had their homeworld, and now the Viesha were at its mercy. High Warlord Karish stood frozen as the silent image of Vieshal, his homeworld, stared back at him from the bridge's central display. The once mighty capital of the Viesha Dominion was lifeless. No comms traffic, no orbital defenses, no signs of his people. They had not lost a battle, they had lost everything. The warriors around him shifted uneasily, their war-hardened faces betraying something unthinkable. Doubt, fear. One of his officers' voice, trembling, whispered what they were all thinking. How Karish forced his body to move, gripping the console. His voice, though strained, carried command. Deploy scout teams, full planetary scan. I want answers. The order gave the bridge a fragile sense of purpose. Drones launched from the crippled fleet, streaking down toward Vieshal's surface. The warships hovered in orbit, their crews silent as they waited. Seconds dragged into minutes. The first drone landed outside the capital's great fortress. Its cameras came online, broadcasting to the fleet. The warriors of the Viesha Dominion had been mighty. Their cities, built for war, were fortresses of steel and stone, but now the streets were abandoned. The towering banners of the Dominion hung in tatters, and there were no bodies, no signs of struggle, no wreckage, no destruction, as if the entire species had simply ceased to exist. Another drone landed in the central war temple where young warriors once took their blood oath to the Dominion. The doors stood open. The halls were empty. A whisper of static crackled through the feed, then a flicker. The image glitched, distorted for a fraction of a second. In that moment something moved. It was only a glimpse, barely visible, a shadow standing where nothing had been before, and then it was gone. On the bridge of the Doomfang a low, unnatural hum filled the air. The ship's lights dimmed, systems flickered. The display screens no longer showed the planetary feed, instead they displayed a message: you were never in control. The ship shuddered. A sudden crushing weight pressed down on the fleet. Alarms screamed. The hulls of warships groaned, bending under an unseen force. Karish spun. Battle stations, prepare for. His voice cut off as the gravity around him shifted. It wasn't an attack, it wasn't a weapon, it was something else. The Dominion had conquered 100 worlds, broken empires, erased species, and now the Viesha were being erased one by one. Ships vanished from the fleet's formation, not destroyed, not exploded, simply gone. Karish's heart pounded. His warriors were panicking now, clawing at controls that no longer responded. The great warlord of the Dominion had never known fear until now. The bridge lights dimmed further. His own reflection stared back at him in the darkened glass of the viewport, and then slowly something else appeared behind him, a shape, a figure, not human, not anything he could comprehend. He turned, reaching for his weapon. There was nothing, and then darkness. The Galactic Council chamber stood in stunned silence. The great empires, the old alliances, the ancient civilizations, every species that had watched the Viesha Dominion march toward Earth were now gathered once more, but this time there was no laughter, no jeering, no arrogance. The Viesha were gone, not defeated, not conquered, gone. Their fleets, their warriors, their homeworld erased as if they had never existed. The great Dominion that once stretched across the stars, that had burned worlds to fuel its Expansion that had declared itself the master of the galaxy vanished without a trace. Counselor Daylin, who had once warned the Viesha of their folly, spoke first. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the chamber like a funeral toll. Did anyone hear a distress signal? No one answered. The council had received no calls for aid, no panic transmissions, no desperate pleas. The war had ended before it had truly begun. Thyron, the Serati diplomat who had pleaded for the Viesha to turn back, exhaled. Slowly, it's as if they were unmade. The chamber shuddered at her choice of words. The screens flickered, displaying the final known image of Vieshal, the former heart of the Dominion. The planet was still there, its city still stood, but they were empty. No war, no destruction, just silence. The void had claimed an empire without a single shot fired in return. A Calrath ambassador, his mandibles clicking in unease, broke the silence. We should investigate. If there are survivors, there are no survivors. Daylin interrupted. The room turned to him. His expression was unreadable. Do you truly believe humanity would leave a loose end? The thought sent a ripple of unease through the gathered leaders. For centuries humanity had been a mystery, a species too young to be a threat, too silent to be ignored. They had never waged great wars, they had never sought dominion over the stars, they had never claimed to be the strongest, the most advanced, or the most powerful, and yet they had never lost, not once. Every species that had threatened them had vanished like ghosts in the void. A new transmission interrupted the silence. A human face appeared on the council's central display. Not a general, not a leader, just an ordinary human, calm, expressionless. You should have listened. The screen went black. That was it. No threats, no demands, no promises of war or peace, just a reminder, a warning. The council chamber remained frozen, no one daring to speak. Finally, Thyron whispered what everyone was thinking. What are they? No one had an answer, but one thing was certain: no species would ever challenge humanity again.